Hello from Sojourn Psychology. It is fall here in Alberta. The leaves are falling off the trees. We're back in the swing of school, and it's kind of sad out there. It's frightening. There's very troubling news of war, very serious news that is good to pay attention to. We want to be informed about what's going on in the world around us. And then there's all the emotion and the psychological impact and the relational impacts. There's all the stuff, all the things, all the things that are impacting us. And I'm a people helper. So part of what I consider is how do I come alongside of people and support people when they're going through things. Maybe that's something you're thinking about too. Number one, how do I support myself? Number two, how do I support the people I love? My friends, my colleagues, people who are similar, people who are different, children. We're all just going through this strange time. And it is good to pay attention to what is going on. Number one, it is good to be aware when crisis is happening. And then number two, what do we do with it? So I am thinking about grief, I'm thinking about crisis, I'm thinking about loss. And as I'm preparing to have this conversation to hopefully help somebody soothe their central nervous system, I naturally thought I'm going to go to one of my favorite emotional resources, which just happens to be Brene Brown's Atlas of the Heart. Okay, great book. If you don't have this book, go get it. Let me see the stickers on it. Heather and I agree. This is an excellent book. But in Atlas of the Heart, Brene does this beautiful job of breaking down emotions, states of being, ways of being. And with grief, she has some beautiful points. So I want to read a few things here. Number one, she starts off the section with this beautiful quote by Elizabeth Gilbert, another amazing resource when we're trying to contemplate and self-actualize, come alongside of others to have a soulful presence in the world around us. Elizabeth Gilbert. Grief does not obey your plans or your wishes. Grief will do whatever it wants to you, whenever it wants to. In that regard, grief has a lot in common with love. And I think that it's sort of like that. We'll use this term of love struck. There's also this poignancy of being grief struck. It is a blindside. Our intense experience of grief and the process of grieving, it is a shock to the system and it stops things. When I'm thinking about the difference between crisis and grief, trauma and grief, in therapy, when somebody comes in a state of trauma, I'm tuning into that trauma. And so naturally, there's parts of me that have endured trauma. And my trauma is going to have an impact on it because I'm so tuned into somebody else who's in trauma. When you tune into somebody else who is experiencing their trauma, it is going to resonate with your own experience of trauma. This is important to know. We know this because if somebody's sharing their story and then we overshare our story, we're not tuning in. And in our awareness, trauma's being shared. I'm aware trauma's being shared. I'm aware that I'm tuning in and it's resonating with parts of me so that I can tune in more, not so that I can overshare my story. Grief is different. My working thought on grief right now is exactly what Elizabeth Gilbert says. And this is why I like sharing it, because I was thinking about this. I'm like, I think Elizabeth's saying the same thing here. Grief smacks us in the face and stops things. So when I am doing work with people about grief, I think grief trumps whatever else is going on. There's a sacredness, there's a lamenting, there is space for anger, bargaining, denial, depression, acceptance in whatever order and organization that's happening for the person. Grief is individual and it's personal, and grief requires our curiosity, but it's a stall and it's a stop. And it really is something we can ignore, we can deny, But if we do, those parts of us that need to be grieved, those parts of us that need us to get stopped and stuck with, they just stay stopped and stuck. Like trauma, but a little different. So I think that there's ways that, again, like so many of our other experiences, our states of being, our emotions overlap, grief and trauma overlap. But it's important, and maybe we just get cognizant, meditative, contemplative about how do I resonate and resound with others' grief and with my own? How does grief resound within me and within others? And how does trauma and crisis resound and resonate within me and others? Lots to think about, lots to get slow about. Now, the other thing with grief. So grieving, this is another piece. This could lead into all sorts of interesting bits, but Brene also notes grieving is the attempt to reform or reconstruct a world of meaning that has been changed by loss. Grief changes us forever. When my grandma passed away, this is years and years ago. I'm terrible with dates, so I'm not even going to guess. The minister said, "We will grieve people until the day that we die." And there's people in your life when they're lost, or there's things that happen to us that forever change us. We grieve a loss. So there's a grief and loss and a trauma experience that changes us forever. There's a grief and loss in having endured lockdowns. There's a grief and loss in losing a life or lives. And we will grieve those things. We're forever changed. And there's beauty in having lamentation when our body touches the pain and sorrow of losses. And then there's also this existential meaning making. We hit an existential crisis. We hit something in our life. Grief pops in, and we can deny it. But if we notice the grief and loss, then we're forever changed to create some sort of meaning. As Frankl would say, bad things happen. We make meaning from them. But that's hard. And just right now, when terrible, terrible things are happening and we are in trauma and crisis and we're grieving, we don't have to worry about making all the meaning that we're going to make in this moment. But grieving is deeply individual and it's deeply personal. And so at my pace, I can find some footing to see the grieving that I'm doing, to experience the loss that I'm experiencing, to find some footing to hope for or to philosophize, not really, but to philosophize about meaning. And then somebody else is going to be completely unique and individual. So there's this piece as well as supporting somebody to be in their own pace and coming alongside of them in their pace as they're grieving. That's how we support. Being curious, noticing, asking questions. The more explicitly we seek to understand someone in their position of grieving, the more explicitly we have knowledge, the better we can come alongside of them and share their oh no and their aha. Especially with kids, it's hard to know what to do. Curiosity, I just don't think we give curiosity enough credit when we're trying to really empathize and be with somebody in their individual experience. How I grieve is going to be different than how other people are going to grieve. Even people who are very similar to me. And the same is true for you. You can have a twin sibling and grief hits you and you will both grieve differently. No matter how long we've been married to somebody or the volume of life we've lived with somebody, the same cultural beliefs that we've shared, grief hits us in an individual way. So we're bearing witness to somebody else's story and we are empathizing in a way that we are curious and we are allowing their story to become vivid in our own mind so that we can meet them in their vividness of their story. And it's okay if we accidentally slip into putting a bit of spotlight on ourselves. The more emotional safety we have, the more the person can trust that we'll get the light shone back on them. But if you slip into your own stuff and you start overshadowing someone else's grief, catch yourself. You apologize, go back in, whatever you do. But we want to be with other people and hear and share and notice what's happening for them, as we're supporting them. And hopefully somebody else will come alongside of us as we need them to when we're grieving. Yeah. And I think that there's this, so really to get slow and contemplative, to think about grieving, to think about losses and trauma and crisis in our times of contemplation and meditation is important. And that's something we can do right now, is to get a little slow and to touch sadness and let sadness mentor us. But how do we greet those who are grieving and they're in pain and anguish and maybe even anger? Gentleness. May we be gentle with ourselves and may we be gentle with each other. May we walk in peace as we seek to understand and know. And love. I think that listening with love and seeing others with the eyes of love and seeking to know others with the mind of love is always something. And as we honor others' sacred space of grief and loss, to be cognizant of our own loss and our own hurt, our own pain, and our own anger. It's okay to be angry. I believe in love more than I do in the actions that follow or fall out of anger. The actions that fall out of anger are risky business. Actions that fall out of love have more potential for healing and supernatural love. But there's a place for us to just notice our own feelings and to be authentic in our emotional experience. If we're not authentic with our own emotional experience, can we be authentically in somebody else's experience? Can we meet with others if we don't first meet with ourselves? So all these sorts of things. I don't really know if there's good answers. It's messy business. It's unpredictable. Grief stops us in our tracks. And when trauma and crisis is come alongside, it's pretty messy. So be gentle with ourselves and be gentle with others. And we can meet people in the mess. And it's okay if it's messy in these messy spots. I hope you're doing okay. I'm trying to do okay myself. And I'm sad and I'm worried and I'm thinking about those things. And I'm getting curious with other people, how they're thinking about their sadness, experiencing their sadness. And I'm trying to encourage people to let the waves of emotion wash over them, because I trust that after this wave of feeling, the next wave comes. And the wave after that, and the wave after that.